So welcome everyone. We're here with Chris Surratt and Joseph Myers. Thanks, Chris, for doing this. And we're going to review the webinar that we did last week. And I just want to thank you for that and thank you for being on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a blast with the webinar, and to be able to get this, it's great. Thanks for hanging out.
Of course. And so here's the thing I just want to start off with is, what was like one of your ahas or one of your takeaways when we think about small groups post-COVID, and as we're making that transition, what was one of your like takeaways from the webinar?
Yeah, you and Rex talked about this when you interviewed him, but the medium that you use, the icebreaker, I think it's icebreaker.video.
Correct.
Format, I loved it. I've talked a lot with churches and group leaders about Zoom fatigue, and most groups are online right now, and people are online with their work, they're online with their church, they're online with their family, extended families, and so they're spending a lot of time, kind of like you and I are right now, staring at little boxes of people. And so that's starting to get redundant and a little tiresome for a lot of people. And there's a real thing called Zoom fatigue. I read on the BBC this morning just about some science behind it. But the Icebreaker website that you used kind of threw a little bit of a twist into it, where we were able to present like a regular webinar. People were able to log in, but then it took people and paired them up for a set amount of time. I think you set like 6 minutes for each question. And as presenters, we provided 3 questions for them to talk about. And then they went off into a breakout room. What was cool about it, I know Zoom has breakout rooms, but it was just random. So you just went and you didn't know who you were going to have in front of you. I had you actually once or twice in front of me. And then if you wanted to, you could go through the questions, or you could just have a conversation, which is kind of what we did for most of them, is just get to know people. But it was just an interesting twist on the whole online conferencing that I think could be kind of cool for, you mentioned for churches. I think it could be interesting to do a church service like that, where you present a message, but then people, talk about points and then come back. But I think especially for small groups, I'm going to try it out with my small group coming up, where, we'll gather like normal. And another interesting thing about it is that you can pull anybody that you want to in as a host. And so, I can grab somebody and pull them, I guess they call it the stage or whatever that is.
Right.
But I thought it might be kind of fun with our group to instead of having our normal, just stare at 12 boxes, have a topic, talk about it for a minute, go into, pairs and dig deeper on it, then bring somebody else up to talk about the next point. So yeah, so just starting there with the format, I thought that was pretty cool. And I started wondering, are there other things out there that we could use that might be interesting?
So that is so cool. So do you see during the transition time and post-COVID that, for instance, Rex and I talked about that. And by the way, those of you who are watching, if you haven't watched that video, it's available and I'll have a link below. But that churches forever will be hybrid. They'll be online and they will be live, right? We're not going back. Do you think small groups are the same way?
I think it's the same thing. Some churches have been doing online groups for a long time. Saddleback is probably the best example of that. My friend Jay Cranda heads up the online ministry there, and they've been doing it for a long time. But most churches that I've talked to, even myself trying to implement it, struggled. It was just hard to get people to buy in to online community. What is online community? Is that community? Technology, when I first tried it, didn't work very well. You remember the days when you'd get feedback because everybody, they didn't have headphones on. You had to have headphones and all that stuff. So a lot of churches, and myself included, gave up on it. But just like online church, people are now accepting the idea of being online and being in community. And so I think it definitely is something that going forward, we need to pay attention to and keep in our, box of tools. Now, is it going to be for everyone? No. I still think there is something about being in-person group sitting across from somebody, there's just a different level of accountability there. You can't be as anonymous. But I think there are also people that probably would have never jumped into a group any other way. And so, I see this as something that we definitely shouldn't drop going forward, and maybe mix it up a little bit and make it more prominent in our offerings when it comes to our groups.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. One of the biggest takeaways during COVID for me, this is going to sound prideful, and I don't mean it overly prideful, but I, for years, have been telling people after I wrote Search to Belong that no, people can connect online. And, people like villainized it and pushed against that, and no, that's not going to happen. And I never said it would replace face-to-face. That would be ignorant. But it is a thing, and COVID has definitely forced everyone to accept, no, people can and do connect online. And it's interesting for me, I've always said that anything that pushes grandparents to see their grandbabies, whatever technology that is, whether it's face-to-face or a car or a horse or online, it's going to be accepted.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I remember several years ago, I was at a small conference. It was a groups conference, and we had a breakout, and there was probably about 14 or 15 of us in the breakout. And the discussion was online groups and having an online campus for your church. And at the time, our church had just started a kind of an online campus with an online host, and I was the online host at the time. And so I talked about the benefits of it, and I thought it could possibly work. And I think every single person in the group basically jumped on me and said, that's unbiblical. People cannot gather in community. There's no way they're going to live in accountability through that. And it's amazing. Those same churches, and I won't name names, are now all online. Their services are online, their groups are online. I'm having conversations with some of those guys, and they want to make it work for the future. And so necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we had to jump online, so now it works. And I say that my group had never been online. I was not running a system where we had online groups, and so I am one of those that's kind of coming in late to the game. But I do think that it's something that we can use in the future. And another hybrid part of it that I think could be very useful, for instance, my group has mostly young people in it. We live in downtown Nashville, mostly 20-somethings, but we also have a couple or two that are in their 60s and 70s. Well, we're having those conversations about, okay, when are we going to gather together and get in person, which we're going to, but they're not going to be able to. I mean, right. I don't blame them at all. I mean, one of them has a heart condition, some things like that. And so we want to be able to have them join us virtually online as a part of our in-person group as well. And I think that opens up a lot of possibilities for groups, everywhere for people that wouldn't be able to attend normally.
Yeah, I mean, if every group had an online option that, hey, all of a sudden my babysitter, crapped out on me and we can't come, or I'm out of town traveling on business, or I'm old or I get the flu, or I just don't feel like, there's just tons of reasons why people don't show up to group, that you could help them make a decision. No, you can show up, just do it online. And
yeah,
it just feels like that option is so viable now. And that barrier, I can't remember, the other day I was talking to someone and I accidentally called this the Tower of Babel moment. This COVID is kind of, okay, God said, if you don't want to spread the gospel beyond your church walls, and don't want to do it online, I'm going to show you, I gave you this resource. Now go and spread the gospel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've seen record numbers at churches for online attendance for worship services. We have seen record numbers with my personal small group. We have had almost 100% attendance every week. And, one of the biggest barriers, and this, Joseph, and doing this for a long time, for a lot of people is childcare. Whether you're going to lead a group or you're going to be a part of a group. Our group doesn't offer childcare because we're in a small kind of condo downtown, so it doesn't offer rooms for childcare, so we can't have that, so that's a problem for us. Well, doing an online group or a hybrid online group eliminates that number one barrier. You don't have to worry about childcare.
Right.
Put them in a Zoom breakout room with a video or something. It's not as hard of an obstacle. So I think there are a lot of obstacles that are coming down because of this option of going online.
Yeah, or just be Jimmy Fallon and involve them in the group.
Yeah, just have them draw the pictures. And
yeah. If you can do late night TV on a Zoom call with your kids, we can figure out how to do small groups. That's my opinion.
Yeah. But one of the ahas that I got out of this in talking to you actually when you were on our podcast a few weeks ago is that going back to online group meetings is not as easy as it sounds. We've spent a lot of time talking about going back to church services, and that's daunting, offering kids, communion, passing an offering bucket, handing out programs, singing. I mean, I hadn't thought about that until Rex brought it up in the webinar, that just the act of singing spreads, a disease or can go viral just from singing on somebody. I never thought about that. So there's all these questions. So mostly I even wrote a post about how small groups are the first step back to church. And I still kind of believe that. I do believe that we'll be able to gather in smaller numbers and homes and all of that. But, you pointed out that what are you going to do if you only have one bathroom and everyone needs to use that one bathroom? Or you have food that you use one utensil to dip out of in, things like that. You're just not going to be able to. Or do you have enough room for people to spread out in your living room so they're not just sitting in our living room? We'll have 16 people, 5 people on one couch by the, just that's the atmosphere. Can't do that anymore. So that was an aha for me, was really thinking about there are some questions that we have to ask before we can even do in-person small groups safely.
Yeah, and if we don't responsibly at least think through that and communicate with one another as a group, then we haven't done our responsibility, right? That's it. For me, it's not so much, hey, don't do that. It's at least think through it, have a conversation with your group bringing everyone back into your home, and give some guidelines, like, touch protocols are, at the door and I think those have to be discussed beforehand and given out and saying, listen, when you come over, we'd rather you not hug. We'd rather you not shake hands. We'd rather you set at least a person apart, kind of, those things have to be discussed. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to have a plan and expectations up front for what the experience is going to be like. I mean, my church is doing that right now. They're having conversations about how we're going to return to worship services, which is not anytime soon in Nashville. But they sent out a survey. They asked, what are some things you're comfortable with? What are you uncomfortable with? How many people would you be comfortable sitting, in a row with? And so I think those are some of the same questions that we need to ask our group members ahead of time before we just flip the switch back on. It's how comfortable are you wearing a mask to the group, at least for the beginning part? How many people are you okay with sitting in a living room with? How are you okay with us not offering food, not having childcare? Some of those questions. But having expectations up front so people know this is a new normal. This is how it's going to be. And I think people are going to be more receptive to it now because we're changing everything in life. I mean, if you just go to a grocery store, it's not what it was 3 months ago. I mean, they have one-way signs going down aisles that you can't go the other way down an aisle. You have to wear a mask into Costco. So I don't think it's going to be that surprising or upsetting to people, but it's good to have those expectations up front. I have a question for you, Joseph, actually. I'm kind of curious. The 4 levels of belonging that you talk about in the search to belong, and I told you that, I've stolen that. That's now mine when I teach it. No, I'm just kidding. I give you credit. I've written about it in 2 of my books and credit you on both of those. But
thanks.
How much do you think it's harder to get through the levels with an online virtual group? Is it going to stay more at that kind of first or second level, or can you get to that third level when you have an online community?
So the 4 levels, just for those who don't know, are public, social, personal, and intimate. So all 4 of those levels exist in as a possibility for every connection, whether it's online or face-to-face or wherever. Those four are always present. And the way we practice them are learned behaviors. And so I think the more that we learn how to use online, the more those will feel more natural, all four of them: public, social, personal, and intimate. There are several podcasts and articles being written in the last few weeks about people falling in love online through Zoom calls and through social distancing, and how it's taken people who are single out of the dating apps into a distancing that has allowed them to get to know each other in a different way than they would, quote unquote, in an online dating app. And so I find all of that fascinating, right? It's just learning to behave differently in either public, social, personal, and intimate.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, because I think one of the blocks to online groups has been that you're probably not going to get past the public and social. And for us to have true community, you've got to get to the personal and to some degree the intimate. Although I like your kind of estimation or your explanation of intimate, which is usually one person. You know, that's your spouse or a mentor. So we're not expected to get there with everybody in our group, but we can at least get to the personal belonging through an online medium. And I don't think either one of us want the in-person to go away. But,
right. No.
Let's make the best of the tools that we have when it comes to connecting people. And this is one of the tools that we have now.
You and I've talked about this. I think we talked a little bit on the podcast maybe, but in the last few years, I've been concentrating on, all those interactions. I still research, I still watch since Search to Belong. But one of the things has been trust and distrust.
Mm-hmm.
And so trust and distrust are two separate concepts. They come from two different places in our brains. Distrust comes from the amygdala, and trust comes from the prefrontal cortex. So the simplest way to say it is we decide to trust and we feel distrust. So they're not on the same spectrum as what we usually think, that more I trust, the less I distrust. That's actually not true. It could be true, but it's not necessarily true. The interesting thing for me then about trust and distrust and how to use online in those four spaces is you have to gain a specific kind of trust level in each of the four to make them viable. It's different, quote unquote, levels. I don't like levels because it says one's better than the other or deeper than the other, but they're different. There's four different kinds of trust and four different kinds of distrust that define those spaces. The interesting thing is Rachel Botsman, who is one of the leading experts today on trust, says it this way, and this is beautifully thought out, that if you want to build trust, you do what's strangely familiar. And what she means by that is you don't introduce something so totally strange to a person, and which is what happened with online. All of a sudden, when online came a possibility, it was so strange to us, it was hard to accept.
Mm-hmm.
But now that with COVID, it's strangely familiar to being person to person. And the more you can, for instance, in a small group, or a church service, but let's say now for a small group, the more you can get that interaction to be strangely familiar to being face-to-face, the more people will accept it and become a part of it. Isn't that beautiful?
That's fascinating. Yeah. When is your book coming out? You sent me a chapter of it. I can't wait for it to be out.
Oh, thanks. Trust me, I'm not sure yet. I'm still shopping it around, trying to find a home for it.
Cool. I can't wait for that. I've read a chapter and it opened my eyes to a lot of ideas. I think another thing that we're going to have to prepare for as small groups come back together is there's going to be a lot of brokenness and mental issues and habits that people are going to be really dealing with out of this. I mean, we're seeing the statistics of, some scary things going on because of isolation. And so your group is not immune to that. And I can guarantee there is somebody in your group that's fighting some demons and, some habits that are coming back that maybe they had gotten past, but this brought them back into it. And so as group leaders and pastors, we just need to be ready for that and have a plan in place. If I was a groups pastor at a church, I would help equip my group leaders for, okay, how do you help people through that? How do you get them connected to counseling? But just have a plan that there's going to be a lot of broken people on the other side, and we're going to have to help them and walk alongside them as they get through it.
Yeah, and just like with any trauma, right, it's interesting because there'll be some people who come back to the group who don't feel trauma at all. In fact, they want to forget the whole thing even happened, and they want you to forget that the whole thing happened. And so you're going to have these people who are wanting to push forward and are excited about life, and then you're going to have people who are kind of pulling back going, I'm not ready. I have a friend who actually lost their mom and their dad in 1 week because of COVID.
Oh my goodness.
Now, they come back to group, they're going to bring that with them in one way or another, right? Yes, the trauma and the stress, and then you're entering, let's say you're coming live back to group, you're entering into an environment that's totally different than what it was last time you gathered. You're not sitting close together. You may not be having a meal. You're not hugging. You may not be touching. Now that thing becomes so totally different.
Yep. And, going back to your trust and distrust, we have learned to distrust anything outside of our control now, environments that we can't control, relationships that we can't control, and so there's going to have to be a trust built back with our group as they come into our environments, as they come back into our personal space. And so knowing that ahead of time, we just have to put some effort into that before we're back. And we keep saying going back to what we were. I don't think it's ever going to be completely what it was. No. I don't think it is. Not that it's going to be worse. It's just going to be different. And so we just have to be ready to adjust to that, pivot to it. We pivoted well online. We're going to have to pivot back to whatever is coming next, the hybrid or in person or whatever that looks like.
That's right. Just like after 9/11, flying wasn't the same. And it never will be.
I flew 2 weeks after 9/11 and it freaked me out.
Yeah.
I mean, when we got off the plane and there were guys walking around with machine guns in the airport, and that's pretty normal now, but it freaked me out. There are going to be some similar things that are going to freak people out.
Yeah, but please don't bring machine guns to your small group.
Yeah, whatever's necessary. In Montana, you may be out hunting.
Well, see,
you just happen to have it with you.
That's why I say Montana, Texas, that. So listen, is there anything that you want to leave small group leaders with before we sign off here?
Yeah, I just want to say that your pivot to online has been amazing. I've seen some incredible things in churches all around the country and all around the world of group leaders and groups that have continued meeting, continued caring, continued serving, even though they're only meeting online. So I just want to encourage you and say thank you, but encourage you to have the same kind of fervor when it comes to the next season. Because like we talked about, it's going to be an adjustment, but it's going to be good. And so just keep at it. You probably won't have 100% attendance for a while, and that's okay. Some people are not going to be ready, but the people that are going to be ready for community, and they're going to be ready for you. So I just want to encourage you, keep on.
Well said, Chris. And with that, thanks everyone for watching. Chris, thanks so much again. You are amazing, and you really help, I think, the whole world of small groups, and I thank you for that from everyone out here who listens to your podcast and reads your blog. By the way, can you tell us where to find your podcast?
Yeah, it's Group Answers, and you can find it anywhere you listen, iTunes, Spotify, but yeah, it's called Group Answers. I co-host it with a coworker and friend named Brian Daniel. So yeah, anywhere you listen, check out Group Answers.
Fantastic, and I'll try to put that link below. Thanks a lot, Chris. We appreciate it. And we'll be back soon.